Story title: Triplets kidnapped a billionaire stranger and drag him home for Father's Day to meet their mother. Before the city woke, before the horns filled the streets, before the air of Lagos thickened with exhaust and heat, Ruth was already moving. The sun had not yet risen, but the ceiling fan above her bed had stopped turning hours ago when power failed again, and the room had grown heavy with sweat. She lay for a while, listening to the faint breathing of her 3 children, triplets, each 8 years old, curled up like small restless birds at the foot of the mattress they all shared. They did not know the silence of hunger yet. She tried to protect them from that knowledge, though hunger stalked the room every morning. She rose quietly, careful not to wake them, careful not to disturb the fragile peace of dawn. Her body ached from market shifts, from carrying crates of oranges and plantains, from bending over smoky pots in a roadside stall that was barely hers. Her husband had left years ago. No goodbye, no letter, only rumors that he had crossed the sea chasing fortunes that never wrote back. She did not speak of him, not to her neighbors, not to her children. When they asked, her eyes found other things to look at. The cracked window, the shoes stacked by the door, the sky waiting to break into day. The children, Michael, Mary, and Julian, were the rhythm of her breath. Their questions were endless, their energy boundless, their laughter the only wealth she had. But in their laughter was also a longing, an emptiness shaped like a man they had never known. Father's Day was approaching. They had learned about it at school, where other children prepared cards and practiced poems. Ruth had prepared no answers. She knew the ache in their voices when they asked, "Mama, where's our father?" On the morning Lagos stretched awake, on the day the story would begin to change, Ruth sent them to buy bread. The sun was rising, painting rusted rooftops with fire. The children's bare feet slapped the pavement as they carried coins wrapped in cloth, promising their mother they would not run too far, that they would return quickly. They never made it straight to the bakery, because on that street, at the corner where the broken kiosk leaned and a man in torn slippers sold phone cards, a car had stopped. Not just a car, an unfamiliar one, shining black, foreign, out of place among battered taxis and Kiki Napep. It was a Mercedes, its glass tinted, its tires unstained by dust. The children slowed. Lagos children always slowed near wealth. They looked, not to steal, but to dream. The door opened, and out stepped a man. Tall, sharply dressed even in the Lagos heat, his shirt white, his shoes polished, his face unreadable. He looked around impatiently, as though the air itself irritated him. His wrist carried a watch whose glint could buy their mother a year of rent. His phone rang, and he barked into it, his accent foreign but his Yoruba clipped and functional. I said, 10 minutes. If the deal isn't ready, I walk. His voice was steel wrapped in money. The children watched him. They did not see arrogance. They saw possibility. They saw the figure of a father. Mary whispered, "Maybe he could be our papa." Michael frowned, practical. "Don't be silly." But Julian's eyes burned with a reckless idea. "Why not? Father's Day is Sunday. We could take him home." Mama would smile. It was nonsense, yet the kind of nonsense children believe with the weight of truth. They had lived years filling an empty space with questions. Now that space was filled with a stranger silhouette. The man finished his call and slipped the phone into his pocket. He glanced at them, 3 children staring too intently. "What?" he asked, his English smooth, dismissive. Julian stepped forward. "Sir, will you come with us?" The man blinked. "Excuse me." Michael grabbed his twin's hand, embarrassed, but Mary whispered fiercely, "Ask him properly." Julian straightened. His voice carried the stubborn courage of hunger and longing. "Please, come home with us. Meet our mama." The man almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he shook his head. "I don't have time for games." He turned away, walking toward the shop. He was meeting someone in. That might have been the end. But hunger sharpens boldness, and longing can twist into desperation. Michael darted behind him, tugged his sleeve. "Uncle, wait." The man froze, irritation in his shoulders. "What is it?" Mary found her voice. "It's Father's Day soon. We don't have any papa. Will you come?" The words were so disarming, so unprepared for his world of contracts and negotiations that he turned fully to look at them. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Memory, maybe, or loss, but it vanished. "No," he said flatly. But the triplets were not finished. They moved together, as if sharing one stubborn heartbeat. Michael clung to his arm. Mary grabbed his other hand, and Julian blocked his path with the skinny courage of a child who has never been told dreams are impossible. "Please," they chorused. The man looked around. People on the street were watching now, curious, some amused. His image mattered. He could not drag children away without whispers staining his name. He sighed sharply, pulling his arm free. "Enough. I have no time." Julian made the choice. He shouted, "Run!" And all three clutched at the man's sleeves, pulling, tugging, laughing nervously as if it were a game, but serious in their hearts. They dragged him, stumbling toward the direction of their home. He resisted, but he was not brutal. He would not strike children. They were stronger together, and the crowd laughed at the sight. Three skinny kids hauling a rich man down the street. Pride prevented him from making a scene. His jaw tightened. And so, unwillingly, unbelievably, the billionaire stranger found himself following three determined children to the alleys of Lagos. By the time they reached a one-room flat where Ruth waited, sweating over beans on a coal stove, he was furious. But the triplets were glowing with triumph. "Mama," they shouted as they burst inside. "We brought someone." Ruth turned, wiping her hands on her wrapper. When she saw him, tall, angry, out of place in her crumbling doorway, her breath caught. The pot of beans almost slipped from her hands. The children beamed. "Mama, happy Father's Day. We found you a papa." Silence. The man stared at her. She stared back. Two worlds collided in that small room, with three children standing between them, proud and hopeful, not knowing the storm they had unleashed. The room was too small for his presence. His cologne, sharp and foreign, clashed with the smell of beans simmering on a coal pot. Ruth's chest tightened as she stood frozen in the doorway, clutching her wrapper, watching her children beam with pride. She wanted to scold them, to demand why they had dragged a stranger into their home, but the words tangled in her throat. The man adjusted his cufflinks, his face hard. "What is this nonsense?" His voice filled the room like thunder. The triplets did not flinch. Mary tugged his hand forward. "Mama, this is our papa for Father's Day." Ruth's heart cracked in two. She forced a trembling smile. "Children, let the man go. He is not your father." But they shook their heads, their eyes bright with stubborn hope. Julian clung to the man's sleeve, as though he could anchor him in their lives by sheer will. The billionaire's gaze swept the room. The cracked walls, the frayed curtains, the children's bare feet. His jaw tightened. He had not set foot in a place like this in decades. It reminded him of beginnings he had buried under money and glass towers. "I am not your father," he said sharply, prying Julian's hand away. Ruth wanted the ground to swallow her. "Sir, forgive them. They are only children." But the triplets were relentless. Michael climbed onto the stool beside him, looking up with wide eyes. "Uncle, even if you're not our father, can you sit, just for today?" He almost laughed, at the absurdity, at the boldness. He looked at Ruth, expecting anger, but saw only exhaustion, and something else, dignity, standing fragile but unbroken. He sighed. 5 minutes. Then I leave." The children cheered. They pulled him to the rickety chair near the stove. Ruth, flustered, poured him water into their only unchipped glass. He accepted reluctantly, the glass too small in his hand, the water too warm. "What is your name, sir?" Mary asked. He hesitated. He lived by contracts, by power, by distance. Names carried weight, but he could not withhold it under their gaze. "David," he said. "My name is David." The children chorused it like a new song. "Papa David." He winced. "No, just David." Ruth spoke quietly, her voice low. "Children, enough. Let the man rest." She looked at him apologetically. "I will walk you out, sir." But he did not rise. Something in him wanted to stay, though he would never admit it. He looked at her again. Her skin glistened with heat. Her hands were rough from work. Her eyes carried storms. She was not young, not old, but life had pressed its mark on her. Before now, Ruth's life was not always this way. There had been days of laughter, of small dreams. She once studied tailoring, her hands skillful with cloth, her mind full of designs. But when her husband vanished, her world collapsed. Rent piled, debts grew, tailoring was slow, so she turned to market work. Faster, harsher. Nights she stitched by candlelight. Days she sweated over plantains. She raised the triplets alone, shielded them from gossip, told them stories at night, so they would not hear her crying. David did not know this, but he could sense in the way she stood, spine straight despite weariness. The children brought out their treasures, a torn picture book, a cracked plastic toy car, a school notebook filled with shaky handwriting. They placed them on his lap, proudly. "See, Papa David, these are ours." He frowned. "I am not," but his voice softened against their smiles. He swallowed the rest. Time stretched. 5 minutes became 10, 10 became 20. Ruth stirred beans silently, listening to their laughter echo in a room that had known too little joy. For a moment, she let it be. When David finally stood, the children protested. "Stay. Stay for dinner." "I cannot," he said firmly. He looked at Ruth. "Control your children." She nodded, shame burning her face. "I am sorry, sir." He walked out into the Lagos dusk, phone already in hand, his world calling him back. The children watched him leave, disappointment shadowing their faces. But he did not forget the sound of their voices. That night, Ruth scolded them. "You cannot drag strangers home. What if he was dangerous?" Julian crossed his arms. He was not dangerous. He looked like a father. Mary whispered, "He will come back." Michael asked, "Mama, why did Papa leave us?" Her heart broke again. She turned off the lamp before they could see her tears. David returned to his penthouse that night, glass windows stretching over Victoria Island, the lagoon glittering below. He poured himself whiskey, but the taste was ash. He saw their faces in his mind, bright, insistent, unafraid. He had built walls of glass and steel, but their small hands had touched something unguarded inside him. Days passed. He tried to forget, but Lagos has a way of pulling threads together. On Thursday, he saw them again at the market where Ruth sold plantains. The children spotted him before he could turn away. They ran, shouting his name. "David!" Shoppers turned, surprised. He froze, cornered again by their innocence. Ruth's face flushed with embarrassment. "Children, stop. Leave the man." But Michael tugged his hand. "Please come home again. Mama cooks beans well." He looked at Ruth. She avoided his eyes. Against reason, against pride, he said, "I will come." That evening, he sat at their table again, eating beans from a chip plate. He was not used to such food, but it tasted strangely alive. The children laughed around him, fighting for his attention. Ruth watched silently, torn between gratitude and fear. As weeks unfolded, he returned more times, always reluctantly, always pretending it was accident, yet always staying longer than planned. He fixed their broken radio. He brought bread once, awkwardly. He told them stories of planes and towers, of places they had never seen. But shadows grew too. One evening, Ruth's neighbor pulled her aside. "Be careful, my child. Gold that shines too bright can burn your hand. Rich men do not come without reasons." Ruth nodded, uneasy, and then betrayal came. It was Sunday evening. They had eaten together, laughter filling the room. The children had drifted to sleep. Ruth stepped outside for air. She heard David's voice, low, sharp, on the phone. "Yes, I know. I've been wasting time in Adjugunal, playing with street children. Don't worry, it means nothing. Just charity." Her breath caught. Her face burned. She stepped back into the room. He ended the call, startled to see her there. "Charity?" she asked, her voice trembling. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Tears blurred her vision. "My children drag you here because they dream of a father, and you call it charity?" The silence was heavy. The children stirred, blinking awake. Mama? Papa David. Her voice cracked. Go inside. Sleep. They obeyed slowly, sensing storm. She faced him, her voice breaking. Leave. Do not come back. He tried to explain, but the words died in his throat. He left into the night, his shadow swallowed by Lagos lights. Inside, Ruth collapsed onto the floor, her body shaking with silent sobs. That night she made a vow. She would rise stronger. She would not let her children's hearts be broken again by a man with money, but no soul. She whispered into the dark, God, give me strength. I will not beg. I will stand. And for the first time in years, her resolve felt like steel. David drove through the glittering streets of Victoria Island that night, but his heart was not in the city lights. Every billboard mocked him. Every skyscraper looked hollow. The whiskey he poured in his penthouse did nothing to numb the echo of Ruth's voice. And you call it charity? It clung to him like smoke. He had not meant it that way. In his world, words were tools, careless when spoken in haste. But in that small room, with 3 hopeful children and a woman holding her dignity like a shield, words carried weight heavier than money. He thought of his own childhood, dust roads, a mother who scrubbed floors, a father who disappeared. He had sworn never to be weak again. Wealth became his fortress, power his armor. And yet 3 barefoot children had breached it in a week. Ruth, meanwhile, moved through her days with fierce resolve. She rose earlier, worked longer, refusing to let her children's disappointment fester into bitterness. She stitched uniforms at night, expanded her stall with borrowed goods, and taught her triplets lessons by candlelight. She did not speak of David again. She would not give him that power. But the children did. They whispered his name as though it were a charm. They saved a chair for him at dinner, even when it stayed empty. He will come back, Mary said with faith only a child could hold. Julian drew his face in chalk on the wall. Michael prayed at night. God, let Papa David see us again. One afternoon, David's car slowed near their street. He sat behind tinted glass, watching from a distance. He saw Ruth bent over a stall, sweat glistening on her brow, bargaining fiercely with supplier twice her size. He saw the children playing with a tire, their laughter loud enough to drown the honking taxis. Something inside him ached, raw and unfamiliar. He told his driver to keep going, but his eyes lingered until the corner swallowed them. A week later, fate pulled the threads tight. David was scheduled to speak at a business forum in Yaba, an event streamed live, reporters eager for sound bites. He stood at the podium, speaking of growth and innovation, of markets and investments. But mid-speech, his gaze drifted to the back of the hall. There they were, the triplets, somehow inside, clutching each other, staring at him as though he carried their whole world. Ruth stood behind them, nervous, ready to pull them away. The hall blurred. The cameras waited. His notes shook in his hands. For a man who commanded millions with a word, he had never felt so powerless. He cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, forgive me. I must speak differently today. He set his papers aside. We talk of wealth and progress, but what is progress if children grow without fathers? What is success if it builds walls instead of bridges? A murmur spread. Reporters scribbled furiously. He looked at the children, at Ruth. His voice softened. A week ago, 3 children stopped me on the street. They did not ask for money. They did not beg. They asked me to come home, to meet their mother, to be a father, even for a day. And I called it charity. Gasps rippled. Ruth's face burned. She wanted to vanish, but his eyes held hers steady. I was wrong, David continued, his voice breaking. They were not asking for charity. They were asking for a presence, for love, something I myself once longed for. He paused, swallowing. We cannot buy family. We cannot sign contracts for belonging. We can only choose it. The hall was silent. Cameras flashed, but his words hung heavier than headlines. He stepped down from the podium, ignoring protocol, and walked toward the back. Security hesitated, but let him pass. The children ran to him, clinging to his legs. Ruth stood frozen, torn between fury and forgiveness. He bent slightly, his voice low but clear. "Ruth, I am not your children's father, but if you will allow me, I want to stand in their lives. Not as charity, not as pity, just as a man who wants to do better." Her throat closed. Tears pressed her eyes, but she held them back. "Words are easy, David." "I know," he whispered. "So let me show you with actions." It did not happen overnight. Trust is not built in speeches. But he returned, not with cars or gifts, but with time. He walked the children to school, sat on wooden stools to eat beans, listened to Ruth's worries without dismissing them. Slowly, walls softened. Neighbors whispered, suspicious, then curious, then respectful. Ruth's heart remained guarded, but cracks appeared where light could enter. Months later, on another Father's Day, the triplets woke him early. They dragged him by the hand into the kitchen, where Ruth waited with bread and tea. They had drawn a card together, 3 stick figures holding a taller one's hands. At the bottom they had written, "Thank you for choosing us." David read it silently, his chest tight. For the first time in years, he felt wealth that no account could measure. Ruth watched him, her face calm, her eyes still cautious but no longer hostile. She placed a cup before him. "Breakfast is ready." It was not a declaration of love, not yet, but it was a beginning. And in that small room, where walls once cracked with emptiness, there was now laughter, presence, and hope. The children had once dragged a billionaire stranger into their home. Now he stayed by choice.